video. I am stuck in traffic, unfortunately. So yeah, I think Kevin's probably given you the most up-to-date information, but the Bi-State Bridge Authority conversation on the Oregon side at least caused a little bit of anxiety, I guess is a good word for it, in that there's some conversation going on around the Bi-State Bridge in Portland and Vancouver and wanting to keep those issues clear and clean and separate, and not have us get mixed up in the I-5 bridge conversation. So we are pushing on the funding and taking a step back on the Bi-State Authority piece until they can get their ducks in a row. They're not as awesome as we are, and they don't work together quite as well.
That's great, Representative. Thank you so much for coming in. And Miles, do you have anything you want to add as far as what we have been doing? You've been very busy signing us up for interviews and meetings with various legislators. Maybe just a little bit of background on that as well.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we have been, as I think I updated the group on earlier, we have been making the round with all the legislators who are going to be involved in the decision making around the $5 million funding allocation that we're seeking for the project this session. So all the members of the Joint Transportation Committee, most of whom Kevin and I have met with and briefed on the project and where the project is and what the purpose of the ask for this session is. And now we're going to be moving on now that the Ways and Means budget allocation process is starting up. We're moving on to meeting with legislators on the Ways and Means Capital Construction Committee. We are fortunate enough to have Representative Williams as a great advocate for the project in the House, and Senator Thompson as an advocate for the project in the Senate. Senator Thompson is also a member of the Ways and Means Capital Construction Committee, which is helpful. The other exciting thing to report is, which does concern all of you, is the port has been invited to present on the project, provide a briefing to the Joint Transportation Committee on progress on the project and where we currently are and what the funding ask is for the 2021 session. So we'll be doing that in the Joint Transportation Committee on Thursday. That will be a good public venue to provide some more information and visibility to the project in front of the leaders in the Joint Transportation Committee. One of the co-chairs of that committee, Representative McLean, has also been very helpful so far with the project and is supportive of the port's funding ask for this legislative session. The only other thing I would flag that is remains to be determined is obviously there's a significant amount of federal money on the order of $2.6 billion coming into the state of Oregon. Representative Williams may or may not have anything to add on this, but certainly that's a huge infusion of money, but also money with the direction that it needs to be spent by the end of 2024. And therefore, the intention, I think, is to spend most of that money on one-time investments and not on ongoing programmatic costs. So I'm sure there are lots of people reaching out and seeking a piece of that money. And I think the legislature is still having a lot of conversations about how that money is going to be spent. But certainly, I think there's a possibility that some of that money will go to capital construction projects like the bridge project. And certainly it puts the Oregon legislature in a better position budget-wise than it was when I last spoke to you a couple months ago.
Well, thank you, Miles. Well, it looks like Senator Curtis King just joined us. Representative Williams, do you have anything to add to Miles's update?
Can you hear me? Got
yes.
it. I think actually Miles's update was exactly what I would have said. That one-time money gives us some some extra flexibility, and this is, I am pushing as my personal priority this $5 million as an investment that makes a ton of sense to come out of that federal investment if there's any question of how we can spend that money before 2024.
Great. Thank you. Any questions from the members of the working group to Representative Williams?
Representative Williams, this is Kate McBride. Do you know what the timing is for that money, the federal money, when there'll be decisions made about where it will go?
I don't yet. There's a couple different ways that they can handle it, and I'm not at the table where those conversations are being ironed out, but I can check in with Rep. Rayfield and try and give you an update if I can get one.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Representative Williams. I certainly appreciate you calling in. You're more than welcome.
Kevin,
yes.
I've got a question real quick.
Yes, please jump in.
Representative Williams. Hi, Representative Williams. This is Bob Benton, Hood River County.
Hi, Bob.
Can you speak a little bit more to what the angst, or I can't remember the word you used, that exists down in Salem with respect to the creation of the bi-state bridge authority? Because that's kind of like the next thing, one of the next things on our list to accomplish. And so I guess I want to understand how the two are connected, the one down in Portland and us in Oregon.
So from what I understand, and there may be, I in fact believe that there is a chunk of the conversation that I have not had access to that is happening on the Transportation Committee and between folks who have been dealing with the I-5 bridge planning process for years before I was in the legislature, that our concept confuses the conversation that they're trying to have with Vancouver about, with the bridge between Portland and Vancouver, and that since that conversation has been ongoing for so long and seems to be reaching some opportunities for resolution, the Transportation Committee felt very strongly that they finish that and then move on to talking about what would happen between our bridges and the gorge, but that it was too many new conversations to throw into the mix to have both of those bi-state bridge conversations at the same time. And Miles and I met, I think, multiple times as folks to try to convince them that there would be no conflict, but we were unable to get that point across.
Okay, so just a follow-up, if that's if their goal is to finish that process first before we start a conversation around the Hood River Bridge, how long is that process anticipated to take?
So it's not that they need to finish the process, it's that they need to finish the planning for that process, and they think that they can get something done this session. So we may be able to come back for a bi-state conversation in the short session, or what seems like a very likely chance that we might have special sessions. Or if they, complete the process of making their agreement on I-5 and we're still able to come to the table with something from a budget note standpoint that wouldn't be legislation, the door is still open for a variety of ways to solving the problem, but calling it a bi-state bridge authority seems to be the biggest issue. All the conversations that we're having about how do we collaborate and how do we plan, still totally on the table.
Thank you.
It's one of the reasons you may hear us use the term compact, bridge compact versus bridge authority, just to call it something that stands alone a little bit.
That's very smart of you.
I think that was
and
your
I should be doing
advice.
the same. Yeah. No wonder I liked it.
And Commissioner, I would just add, we had an explicit conversation with one of the co-chairs of the Joint Transportation Committee about, if we're not going to move forward with this bi-state study bill in 2021, we are going to need to move forward with a bill to actually create some sort of bi-state compact to manage the new bridge in 2022 to stay on the project timeline. And there were no concerns about doing that next session, simply about running a study bill at the same time when this other bi-state bridge authority is also being studied this session.
Right.
That's exactly my understanding, Miles.
And folks, I actually, the representative is on the road, but I actually have a 2:15 that I need to get to. And since she's conferencing in through my line, I'm going to have to cut this meeting off after 15 minutes. Are there any final questions anybody has?
It looks like we're good, Justin. Thank you very much for all your help patching Representative Williams in.
Excellent.
All right,
Happy to
you
help.
guys. Thanks for your flexibility. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
So with that, we've got Brad Boswell and our esteemed Senator representing Clickitat County, Curtis King. Welcome, Senator. How are you?
Well, I think we're doing all right till somebody tells me otherwise, but you know, we're just trying to keep our head above water and keep moving forward. So anyway.
Well, welcome. Thank you for being here. I hopefully you were able to catch some of Representative Williams's comments and some of
I
the.
did catch a few of her closing comments there, and you know, I was a little concerned when she started off about wanting to get the I-5 bridge done first, and then I'm going, well, that's like 2030 or 2031 before they're going to get that bridge done. And I'm hoping we'll be having traffic across our bridge well before then. So yeah, they're two distinct projects, and obviously they're obviously two distinct projects in the sense that one's a lot smaller than the other, and I think we have a better shot at getting ours done well before they even start construction over there. So anyway.
Well, that's great news. Well, so the two prompts for Representative Williams were looking at funding to keep phase 2 of the bridge replacement moving forward, that being funds for engineering, ongoing governance work, developing the finance plan with traffic and revenue studies, and then likewise the process for developing that bridge authority legislation. Can you give us an update on where those two elements might be? And Brad, if you need to jump in, feel free. Senator King.
Well, at this point, we dropped our transportation budget today at 10 o'clock. And in that budget, I believe there is a proviso that references language about the bi-state and bridge agreement and a study that will be done by our Joint Transportation Committee and looking at what are the elements that are needed in that type of an agreement. And then we also had moved, we had placed $5 million, kind of hid it for a while out in Nowheresville, and we brought that in, and in the 21-23 budget, we have $5 million that will go to Clickitat County with the direction that it's going to be used, can only be used on the Hood River Bridge. And I don't remember all the elements of how it says it can be used, but basically it's to help with phase 2. And that is in the Senate version. Now we have to match up with the House in a week or two, and we will do our best to keep that money in there. I would tell you that the money was there. As I say, it was a savings on another project that was in my district, and the chair over in the House had agreed that we could move that. We left it on the project, but we moved it out to like 2030, just so it wouldn't be noticed. And now we're bringing 5 of it back in. The other 5, because there was 10 million in savings, and I think the other 5 is going somewhere else. But anyway, it was a good trade as far as I was concerned, because it gave us that 5 million. So hopefully the House will agree to that movement of those funds, and we'll get that taken care of. So
Great news. That's wonderful, Senator. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Brad, do you have anything to add to that, or do members of the working group have any comments or questions for Senator King?
I'll just add that all of this was due to Senator King's work in the legislative process. So, Senator, we do appreciate all of that, and we'll be working on the House side to try and make sure that it stays in there as well.
I appreciate that as well. And so the one last thing that I would add, and then I'll take any questions you might have, but there are 3 or 4 proposals for a transportation, what's the word I'm looking for? Proposal, I guess. Not a budget, but a new funding, new taxes, and then how we would spend those funds. There's a real push to try and do that this session. I honestly can't believe that it's going to happen, but I've been surprised before. But I put forth a proposal, and in that proposal I had I want to say $100 and some million for the Hood River Bridge. Not that proposal is going to go anywhere, but the point is I'm making a point of that bridge every time I get the opportunity, so that as this proposal moves forward, be it this year or next year or 2023, that project is included in any of the projects that are going to be funded. So that's my goal. Be glad to try and answer any questions you might have. So,
Senator, I'd just like to say thank you for your consistent effort. Frank, when the first time you told me that there was money being held in abeyance someplace in the state of Washington that may come back at some point in the future, I had little faith.
well,
this is really encouraging.
You were probably right, but sometimes, you'd rather be lucky than good. So, we got a long way to go, but at least we've made it this far, and I have hopes that it'll stay there. So,
and certainly champions count. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator King. Really appreciate all your work. Keeping the money in your district. Very important for us.
Well, I would agree. Important for me as well. So anyway, thank you all. And thank you all for your efforts. This is what is making this work, is the fact that we have this bi-state group of people that are working together with one common goal. And we're able to put forth that story time and time again, is that we have both Washington and Oregon working very well together and making good decisions and reasonable and decisions that are going to make this project work. And that goes a long way, as far as I'm concerned, in being able to sell the importance of this bridge, as well as the viability of actually getting it built. So thank you for all your efforts. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. So,
well, Senator King, before you hop off, can you maybe just have 1 or 2 comments about the Bridge Authority formation? How do you see that transpiring, if not this session, next?
Well, I think, so from my standpoint, I've talked with the staff. Brad has talked with our nonpartisan staff. We've also had conversations with Dave Catterson, who is the exec of the Joint Transportation Commission. I think we have a good understanding of what we're trying to accomplish here. I've stressed the fact that I thought we ought to keep this as simple as we can. and you know, reiterated that I've reiterated the proposal that I gave you a few months back about, you know, a 6-member panel, and 2 of them are county commissioners, and they chair and they operate, you know, all that good stuff, which you've heard before. But I've told them that's, you know, that isn't where you have to end up. We need to know what are the elements that need to be in a bi-state agreement, be it tolling, the authorization of the tolling and the controlling of the tolling, or are we going to leave those to the counties to have final approval, all of those kinds of things. So I would anticipate, and I don't remember what the proviso says about a time frame, but I believe it's at the end of this year that they will come forth with their recommendations in regards to that study. Anyway, that's kind of where we're at with that, and you know, we just got to keep moving. You know,
absolutely. Well, thank you again, Senator. Appreciate all of your work and heavy lifting on this, and thank you for your time.
Well, I just want to get a bridge built.
Okay, we do.
I want to get it built between Hood River and yeah, whatever, White Salmon. So anyway, thank you all for your work, and thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.
Bye-bye.
Well, wow, that's very promising news on the Washington front. So thank you to the Klickitat County Commission and both cities. I know you're doing the work behind the scenes to advocate for that effort. So any thoughts before we on what we've heard before we transition into the presentation?
I have just one question for Brad. You know, it sounds like this still needs to go through the House. Is there any indication that the House will not give this the support that Senator King has given it?
I think that Senator King has been reaching out to the House folks. So I don't have any red flags right now, but I'm going to be reaching out and communicating to the two House members from that district and flagging it with them. Again, part of the challenge with budget stuff is that we don't know it's in there until we actually see it. So we now have something that we can point to and go and talk with folks about. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but we still have work to do.
Thanks, good job.
Brad, if everything goes according to Hoyle, when's the expectation that money would actually be available?
So this is in this year's budget, which goes into effect, I believe their calendar year is July 1 this year. So I'll get confirmation on this, but I think it would be available beginning July 1, 2021. But I'll have to go, don't hold me to that. I'll have to go and get confirmation of that. But that's my working presumption right now.
Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts? All right, well, thank you both Brad and Miles for attending and being available for questions. We'll keep you posted. I'm sure you'll be doing the same.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Good to see you all. Hey, Kevin?
Yes, Michael.
At some point, the group, we probably need to brief the group on the federal funding that may be available through the Build Back Better legislation that is being conceived on Capitol Hill and in the White House. So just looking ahead to that possibility and being prepared for it.
Yeah, there's a lot of, there's 3, I guess, funding strategies out there. The biggest one for the bridge is the BBB. What's that stand for, Michael?
Build Back Better. Build
Back Better. And it sounds like that may be developing a little bit later than the other 2, but that's something our lobbyist Hal Heemstra is keeping an eye on for us.
Well, and the 2 other points, of course, are one, the transportation reauthorization legislation that is expected. And what we are trying again to do from the Senate side, with the early interest anyway from Senator Merkley, is to try to build in the higher TIFIA cap for projects in rural communities. And TIFIA could be a significant part of the finance stack for the project. And then second, and probably less useful, is that the earmarks, what used to be called earmarks, are coming back under the term community support projects or something like that. And there's various elected officials, representative senators, are developing methods by which their constituents can request funding through that mechanism. Meaning what sort of form to fill out and what sort of information to provide. Although on that level, as we heard about today, the funding, amount of funding was likely fairly insignificant relative to a project this size, meaning 200,000, $500,000, something on that magnitude. But regardless, the point is that we're trying to track those possibilities with the Summit Strategies, or Hal Huemstra in DC. So I think it's say more on that later at a future meeting.
Great, thank you. All right, so the next item on our agenda is going to take the majority of the time this afternoon. And this is a strategy, bridge replacement strategy presentation that was originally presented to the Port Hood River Commission based upon input from the public, members of the public. And it was really an opportunity for staff to take a step back and really develop a comprehensive review of where we're at on this project, everything from keeping the current bridge safe to replacing the bridge, and then also how do we communicate our efforts in an effective manner. So I am going to, Michael is very nice enough to step in and work with us to do the presentation. Can everybody see that? Should say Bridge Replacement Strategy Work Session. Thumbs up. Great. Well, Michael, thank you for agreeing to go through this presentation. I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Let me try to characterize this. You can stay with the first slide, Kevin.
Okay.
As Kevin said, this really came about because of first, a lot of different actions were being requested and updates being prepared for our commission. And in a way, all those different actions, because we're active on so many fronts, it became clear that we needed to, and our commission directed us to try to pull these together in a way that is understandable as a overall approach or strategy for the work that we're all doing. And then second, and sort of simultaneous, there was a member of the public on the Oregon side that was posing a number of questions and was engaged in putting ideas in and essentially pressing our approach. And we're trying to answer those questions. We're also trying to take the direction from the commission to present something that's more holistic and representative of all the efforts going on. So we called it a strategy. We prepared it as staff and presented it to our commission as a discussion piece. And the commission took no action on it, but there was a lot of discussion and input. We have modified it a little bit for the presentation here for you, but by and large, this represents the same thing that we presented to the commission. And I know our commission is always asking us, well, what does the bi-state working group think about this or that? So clearly we're in this together. We're all part of the same team, and none of us want to fire out and start going in a direction the rest of the group doesn't feel is appropriate. And so this presentation, of which I will move through very quickly, is intended to be a chance for the group, the full bi-state working group, to weigh in and give us input and thoughts on whether this is coming together, making sense, and is on the right path. Our intent is, our hope is that some version of this can be brought in a distilled form, can be brought back to our commission before the end of June for basically tacit approval. And as you would know by now, a strategy on this project will always change. It's always going to be different. So this represents essentially a point in time, spring of 2021. So again, I'll move through this very quickly. It's in 3 parts. There's a place to stop and ask questions and engage in discussion after each section. The first section is the existing bridge. And you might ask, why is that important? Well, it's important for a variety of reasons, but first and foremost, ever since I've been at the port, the question's been posed, how long is that bridge going to last? When do we need to replace it? As though that there's a definitive answer for that. But in order to answer that question, we engaged, and you'll see, in a significant amount of evaluation work. And the second part of that is, if you know generally when or how long the bridge will last, or better said, at what point do you really start to put in really significant capital money, tens of millions of dollars, to keep the current bridge safe and operational, that will help guide and focus the efforts in terms of bridge replacement and create a sort of a time frame for that. So let's get into that first section. Again, moving quickly. We feel, and we've always felt, our first obligation is to keep this bridge safe and operational. And if this bridge falls down, we don't have a bridge. None of us can get across the river at River Mile 169. The second is, of course, to do what we're doing, to do everything possible to replace the current bridge. So our commission has to essentially act in 2 different places at the same time, and keep it safe and operational, and second, replace the thing. So the existing bridge, again, that's kind of a look back, but it's important, and I'll fly through this, but it's important to know that the current bridge and the expectations for its lifespan and the work that needs to be done on it, capital maintenance, operations, and capital projects, fundamentally was based on work that was done in 2011. And this was intended, we called it a long-term preservation model at that time, to try to determine what needs to be done, when, and how much to keep the current bridge going. Next. So to do that, you break the bridge into its different component pieces. There's a hierarchy for that, all the way from the bridge as a whole to a certain steel member of the bridge. The bridge is broken down into each subdivision, each generally component piece of it that makes it a whole. There's a rating system. The NBI rating system is used by many DOTs around the country, including ODOT. So the condition state of each component piece of the bridge is rated. And when you want to be satisfactory or greater, when you get below that 5.4, you're getting worried. And condition state 2 is when you've got a real problem and the bridge was imminent to be closed. The assessment is done of each subdivision. On the left, you see substructure, superstructure on the right. And this was a way of collecting the different data we have about each component group from prior studies, from inspections, and from existing plans and specifications that we might have. And then that condition history is aggregated. This shows you the substructure NBI rating, and you can see each year, or sometimes every other year, when an inspection is done, you can see in the far right, second from right, you see the NBI rating, condition state 6 for many years now. Next. And then interestingly, what the engineer, What the engineers did, and this is important, is that they, based on aggregate data from other dots, and they assessed based on its condition state, they projected ahead what the deterioration rate of each component piece would be under 3 different scenarios: a high, medium, and a low deterioration rate. It's really difficult to get engineers to be predictive and absolute, and Mike, forgive me, Arthur, but it's very difficult to get structural civil engineers to say, well, it's going to last this long or that long. There's so many variables. So we created a bandwidth by 3 different deterioration rates, which represent 3 different deterioration curves going forward. And I'll come back to this in a minute, but what that did, and there was a lot more to it, obviously, is what it's aggregated around this capital maintenance plan for the bridge, which literally is a 30-year projection. The top part is the capital side, and the bottom part in blue is the inspection and maintenance side. And you can see the going forward, the most proximate 4 years there's a lot more known, there's a lot more certain, and we can start creating and planning for specific projects or efforts to take place. When you go beyond that, it becomes much more of based on assumptions that will invariably change. But the point of this is to try to project ahead what needs to be done, what needs to be built or improved or fixed for a 30-year period, with the underlying intent that without setting aside bridge replacement, we can keep this bridge open and operational and safe for 30 years. One thing I want to point out here, and it's, if I did a bubble diagram, you'll see, we think we get out there to 2007, 8 or so, when we can hold back on some significant capital maintenance or capital projects and keep the bridge safe and operational. And that's intentional. We have to do what we have to do to fix the approach ramps or make sure something is that's necessary is being done. But once you get beyond a 5-6 year period, and that is a little bit variable, you have to spend some really significant dollars in this bridge. That's when I said orders of magnitude of multiples of $10 million to keep the bridge open and functional. So what this does is essentially establishes the rationale for a time frame in which we can say, if the bridge funding is obtained and we have a path forward to bridge replacement, then we don't have to spend significant additional dollars on an old bridge. Once you get into that 8, 9, 10 year period, you really got to start ramping up the capital spending in particular. Next. So this is old news, but when they developed it under 3 different deterioration models, you see 3 different trajectories of capital spending on the bridge. The point is that each deterioration rate assumption has a different aggregate spending that accumulates at different rates over time. So we did that in 2011, and someone would say, well, that's pretty old. Well, we update that every year, sometimes twice a year, and there's mandatory inspections that take place on this bridge. The fracture critical every 2 years. Climbers hang down. They're an arm's length of every single steel member or gusset plate on that bridge. They often take photographs of it, they take notes, and they're monitoring the condition state of all those structural pieces and members. Underwater takes place every 2 years. ODOT divers go down. Lift span M&E is on a 5-year cycle. Load rating, it's really up to the feds, but that's on about a 15-year cycle. Guardrail monthly, steel deck, if you try to drive across the bridge today, we're welding it for 2 weeks. We're spending about $60,000 a year on welding alone. And specialized or as required, a lot of those inspections accrue around the lift span. A lot of mechanical and electrical components. And then this is a quick series, just examples for the commission, reminders of the types of projects that are carried out and the magnitude of the spending. Big one to get the auxiliary truss done in 2017. damage to the port truss that occurred. That was good. And a big investment in the skew system and the drive motors. And then we had to give a shout out to our bridge managers, often out there at midnight and beyond. And just a quick nod, again, this was prepared for our commission, but the big issue was the new load rating that came through. That was required by ODOT, and it was really a function of a national, not only the Minneapolis bridge collapse, but also a new look at specialized hauling vehicles, which are short distance between axles and have a high point load to the bridge deck. And this lays out what we're underway now with engineering phase 1. There'll be a second phase engineering. And then we believe somewhere around the fall of this year, what will come back to the commission is, here's what can be done to get the load rating back up, and here's what it would cost. And that's sort of a no-go decision point. If it's financially feasible, if it's reasonable and can be done, then we would launch into plans and specs. So I'm assuming that the best case scenario, well, at least the likely scenario, is that if it's feasible and doable, it won't be till fall of 22 that we may be able to get that load rating up to 80,000 pounds. Best case would be spring of 22, but that's, I think, unlikely. And this is like a reverse perspective of the latest version of that bridge, the capital plan. And this has been modified based on our recent meetings with our bridge engineers. And I just point out two projects here that can't be avoided. One is there's deterioration occurring at the approach ramps on the north and both the north and south. The more significant deterioration is at the north approach ramp, which is much longer. And you see two phases. I have a hard time reading it, but there's two phases here that we really need to do these. We think the order of magnitude is about $500,000 to get those done. And has to be done in dry weather, will have significant traffic impacts, but that's a big one that needs to be done. And then down here, or I guess I can't control it, but down below at the lift span, we have, it's the lift span. We've got inspections occurring in a month, and we need to take care of the rack pinion shaft and the motors up there. So there's a couple, and this is consistent. We always have to do some things on the bridge, and we've got two that are important, need to be done. We're trying to delay or hold off on other big ticket items with the hope that bridge replacement efforts really take hold and we don't have to spend that money. Next. All right, so this is kind of a landing place for discussion. Again, we wanted to convey to our commission and to you the rigor that's gone into evaluation, inspection, and continual monitoring of the condition state of the existing bridge, and also anticipating what kind of capital spending is needed, but with the eye to saying, let's not spend what we don't have to, because we're all hoping for the bridge replacement effort is successful.
Any questions for Michael or comments? Yeah, Arthur.
Michael, hey, I'm wondering if you could enlighten us on what confidence intervals they used in their analysis of the bridge, of the remaining life of the bridge, or the failure modes of the bridge.
I missed that operative term. What was it?
Oh, confidence intervals, or to put it a different way, you gave a range of potential futures for this bridge. Were those 10 and 90% bars, or do you know what confidence the engineers had in those limits that they were placing?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if I can answer that very well. The information base for predictive modeling of large structures is limited, like a bridge. And it's so highly variable based on wind and weather conditions, whether there's a salt environment or not, and things like that. So the best I can say is that their confidence level was very high, that within that range, high deterioration versus low deterioration, they felt confident that it was in there, within that somewhere. And the benefit we have is, one, the bridge doesn't go up very much. The lifts don't occur frequently. And two, we're in a high wind and low salt environment. So the steel, the paint is quite resilient under those conditions.
So let me maybe ask in a different way. I sat through 2 sessions when you had engineers who had done that analysis, which you just described. And one year it was stated that that the issues with dynamic loads, and another year a different engineer came and said it was with static loads. And I'm wondering what the current belief is. What is the potential failure mode in the bridge? Is it the static loads or dynamic loads? You know, it seems like since you're controlling the speed of vehicles across it and putting weight limits on it, you know, it goes towards both of those.
Yeah, well, I'm not an engineer, but I'd say definitely both. But the live loads driven by the traffic are have the most impact. But especially shorter term, longer term, it's the condition state of the paint, of the condition of the protection for the steel structures. I will say that the most critical, and this is one that can't be modeled, is in a seismic event, a Cascadia subduction zone. If we have a 6 or 7 here, those towers are probably in the river. And that's probably not what you're getting at here, but that's the condition, or a significant barge strike that can't be modeled.
No, actually, those are very helpful. So the engineers have said that they don't think that this bridge would stand to a 6. Did you get that number, the 6 or 7, from the engineers?
That's not a specific answer, but that's what I believe they would say, and what I understand to be the case. And that comment came several years ago from an engineer with the state of Oregon, not our bridge engineer, but there's a very high load with the counterweights at a high point under fairly spindly tower conditions.
Thank you.
Michael, question for you. When do you estimate receiving numbers back from the engineers that would tell us what we needed to do and how much it would cost for getting us back to the 80,000?
We'll have those by the fall.
Okay, and if the commission decides that those numbers are too high or unattainable, can we move forward in pushing, since there are these new pools of money that both sides we're talking about at the beginning of this, can we then push forward like Cascade Locks did and declare an emergency that we need to get capital funding to up a bridge project, a new bridge project?
That would provide the impetus for that, absolutely.
Thank you.
It would be a much stronger case if we knew exactly, 1, can it be done, and 2, what needs to be done, and 3, how much does it cost? So yes, absolutely, that's the point here. I will say there's kind of a nuance in that there's multiple locations that didn't meet the standard based on the new weight limit and load analysis criteria. But many of those accrue to the trusses. And our engineer believes that if those were specifically tested, meaning under live load conditions with a strain gauge attached to it, that we could demonstrate to ODOT that in fact the current configuration, the current structural configuration of the truss is sufficient to meet their standard. So part of this early effort is to determine if that can be done and how many of those points that are determined insufficient can essentially be taken away or do not need to be addressed.
All right. Any other comments before we continue on?
I've got a question, Kevin.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
please.
So I don't think we got a copy of the presentation beforehand, so I'm just going to kind of go off of what I think I saw. The NBI ratings look like the last one that you had shown was from 2009. Are those still are those still at 6s today?
They are. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I guess the other question's a broader question is the strategy was listed initially on one of the first 2 pages of the slide to say that it was the goal to replace the bridge as soon as possible. I guess it just, you know, I haven't been on the committee very long, but it seems like there are options to move forward with replacing the bridge that can happen fairly quickly, but there seems to be a lack of confidence in going in that direction from the committee. So I guess my question is that accurate? Is that really our strategy? I mean, are we trying to move as quickly as possible? It doesn't seem to, like if somebody asked me from the general public and they read those words, I would not be, I would be confused as to how to respond to them if they asked if we're really moving as fast as we can.
Well, I would say yes, but we haven't talked about the strategy yet. This is just to look back and make sure we all understand how we're addressing the current bridge. I will say that when we get into the strategy, the next phase, that's the good question, because I believe we are. But it's not to say there aren't always other ideas to do something faster. You heard from Rep. Williams, Senator King, the opportunity in Salem for additional funding, opportunity in Washington for additional funding. We just got the build grant. We need to go further and demonstrate that we're further along to be able to make a credible ask for big money or for being set up for a P3 effort. But that's a core question to this next phase of the presentation today.
Along with the creation of the Bridge Authority as well.
Compact.
Bridge Compact. Thank you, Bob. All right, should I keep going?
Yeah, let's move ahead. Okay, this is more the guts of it, and I'm not going to dwell on some of these pages, but again, this is the effort to say all these things that are going on and working on, and Commissioner Benton's question, are we doing enough? Should we go faster? Kevin, you don't have to move forward that fast. Can we answer that correctly? Can you go back, Kevin?
Yeah, sorry. I think. There we go.
So what we're going to go through is a series of key points, and when you get into a strategy, there's a lot of semantics. Is this a strategy? Are these strategic objectives, strategic principles? But we try to collect and condense down what defines the approach we're taking on all these different fronts. And what I'm going to do is run through this pretty quickly, and then there's a landing place for more discussion. Go, Kevin. Okay, so you all know them. There's a lot of challenges here. We think about it as replacing a bridge, small community. We don't have a lot of truck traffic, et cetera, et cetera. We have a lot to overcome in a small market. However, Kevin, next. There's a lot of opportunities. We're in a pretty perfect environment with the seniority of our congressional delegation in the Northwest. When they give you a build grant, they're saying, okay, we have some confidence in you. We can leverage that. There's a lot of things we have going for us to help overcome those challenges. Next. When we prepared this for the Port Commission, we came up with a 9-point strategy. And I'm not going to go through them here. I'm going to go through them one by one. The question is when you see all these, and we did modify them at the end a little bit, does this reflect how you would describe and what you believe are the important strategic objectives for this project? What a handsome group there. And I noticed there's one gentleman that wore a suit, or at least a sport coat. That's stepping out. Some of these seem simple and obvious and Are they part of a strategy? We think they should be, and we should be able to articulate that again and again. I think this group represents this first principle. We need to have a bi-state collaboration. You heard it from Senator King. The lineup of interests, engaged leadership, advocacy on both sides together. So that's strategic principle number one. I won't go through these either, but there's a series of completed actions. This is what we can say we've done to follow this and adhere to this principle. Next, and then here's what we're doing now and what our next steps are. So the strategy would have underneath the principle, here's what we've done, here's what we're doing. Commissioner Benton, on every one of these, you can ask the question, well, why aren't you doing more? Or is there something else you can do? And that's an absolute fair question. We can always say we can do better for sure. Next one is we demonstrate we've got a bi-state coalition, and then we have to build community awareness and support. A lot of different ways to do this. But we believe increasing the understanding from businesses and from the general community why this is important and what they can do to help, and be prepared to take advantage of that and leverage that advocacy is critical. So here you have a number of actions that have been done, all the way from tribal outreach to the various surveys that were done. We've got poster boards and we've got newsletters and we've got project updates, and we're using those constantly. And then what's next? We will have to do another public information campaign. Phase 2 will probably have a plus up in the public involvement strategy, and likely a formation of some advisory committees to help out on different levels. So that's 2. Number 3 is we got to build legislative support and awareness. And honestly, I'm pretty proud of this. This commission has spent somewhere between $70,000 and $90,000 every year for the last 20 years to build those bridges in DC, and especially Washington, DC, but now in both states with our own public advocates in Salem and Olympia. So we need, and this is a long path. You don't walk into someone's office and say, we need $100 million. You build those relationships, you build that communication, that awareness with staff and with elected officials at every level. So you can see some of the prior efforts in these photographs have been done. So a lot of completed actions. Some of these deliverables, I guess you'd say, overlap between different categories of strategic categories, but we've been pretty successful finally with the build grant and the work we did in Salem to get $5 million in 2017. But there's a lot more to do. We were hoping for study authorization. You heard from the representative earlier. The one-on-one meetings are happening with the Ways and Means and Transportation Committee. We're asking for $5 million from both states again in this long session, etc. So number 4 is demonstrate project readiness. And this is a really crucial one, Commissioner Benton, to maybe partially answer that point. You just simply don't get a whole bunch of money at you unless you can demonstrate that you're ready for it. And that means a number of steps that we're taking right now come together in this particular strategic objective. We need to get to a point where people can say, yep, I know why it's important to do. I know what happens if we don't do this. I know that they're ready to do it. I know they have a plan in place. They have an organizational structure that's ready to accept the money. And I believe, meaning from a public official standpoint, that if I support this, I will see a bridge there. I will see a project get done. And what the path we're on is to get to that point of project readiness. We need to get through the EIS. We need to demonstrate that, or we need to make sure that our elected officials are fully briefed and they understand it. We need to show that we have a defensible cost estimate. When someone says, how much does will the thing cost? That we can defend a number, or at least a range, that can show that they have confidence that it'll get done within a certain bandwidth, and so on and so on. Number of completed actions. the 2017 funding and authorities were a really big effort. Steve Siegel, if he's still on the call, was just crucial to getting that done. And the build grant was another big one. So here's where our actions on the legislative side have been paying off. We got to get through the ROD. We got to characterize the geotechnical conditions. We need to have an engineer underway for not only the 15 to 30%, but potentially could engineer the project all the way to completion. We need those solid cost estimates. And those are in part driven from the geotechnical analysis, which is perhaps the highest uncertainty construction related element of the project. We need authorization for a bi-state bridge authority. We need to have a structure in place that we can point to and say, this is the group, this is the organization that can carry this project out. And we then would all need to stand up that new government, basically make sure they're capitalized and make sure they have the staff structure to move the project forward. So the fifth one is, at this point, we're preserving the different options for how to deliver this bridge. You've heard from some experts about P3, that absolutely remains on the table. But likewise, a typical design bid build project needs to stay on the table too. We need to make sure that the steps we're taking now and finishing the IS, understanding the mitigation requirements, hiring an engineer, driving through the next phase of engineering, that all this work and this money is spent to not preclude a delivery option that may turn out to be the most viable or the most potential. And we need to make sure that we're doing this to make sure all of our options are available. So we got the authority from the state of Oregon for P3s. We approved the policy. There's been several work sessions now related to project delivery. We have experts that we've retained that can help us and guide us on what those options are and eventually which is the best one to pursue. And there's some of the things I mentioned. One important piece you'll see later is the second one, the owner's representative. Now that we're getting closer to the construction, we need to anticipate that. And we need not only that expertise, but we need to be able to start modeling what the construction phase of this project will look like. The in-water work windows, where does staging take place? How long would construction occur? What's the time frame? How do you keep the existing bridge going while there's a new bridge being built? When do you make the switch over? How and when would you take out the existing bridge? In other words, deconstruct it. All sorts of construction questions are now more prevalent, and we need to have the expertise to help us through that. This may be self-evident, but I think it drives through to the question, do we have the right team? Do we have the right array or variety of expertise around us to guide us? Because none of us are experts in this major infrastructure type project. I would argue that we do and we have. Go ahead, Kevin. And this just represents several of the different categories in the individuals. I'd say there's probably twice as many based on sub-consultants and other things that are assisting here. But this is trying to, kind of roll up way, characterize, do we have the right array of talent around us? Is there some piece missing or pieces missing? Each of these has, I can't see it on the right, but basically each tranche represents a different area of expertise. And so the question is posed to us as staff and to you as decision makers, is this the right array of talent? Do you see some gap that we need to fill, or looking ahead, what do we need to access? So that's the current team. This is sort of an old organizational chart, but it's a little port-centric because this is really speaking to the $5 million from the state of Oregon. But you can see the structure generally as it's laid out, the different array of consultants and other experts that we have. And then if you look ahead, what we believe and what we spoke to our commission about was, one, we need a project engineering team. That's going to be a big firm. They're going to have a lot of areas of expertise on that firm, and the requisite experience. And then we also, as I said earlier, believe we need to add that construction experienced owner's rep, which is also probably a firm, not an individual, but it represents that added expertise, not only to help us monitor and to manage the contract with the engineering firm, but also to do some various tasks related to the what ifs about, as I said earlier, timeframe for construction and staging and different delivery models. And that this is just a concept, but that new organizational chart may look something like this. You can see over on the right in the orange are the advisory committees. The executive committee, that's something that have been involved with continuously, but you see the working group in the upper right, and below that a public advisory committee, which is often utilized in a project like this, and then a technical advisory committee that has direct input into the AE design firm. Now, if efforts were successful to obtain $5 million from the state of Washington, that's not going to come to the Port of Hood River. That's going to likely flow to Klickitat County. And Klickitat County will need to have a significant role in the delivery of that product from that funding. So that very well could rearrange, modify an organizational chart like this. And the point here is not about the details as much as it's about, we need to look ahead to a concept that anticipates potential additional funding sources and a greater role for the bi-state advisory group. This one, I don't have much to say about other than it's pretty much self-evident. This is not a project, at least in its early years, it's going to be someone's going to drop 300 million on us. We need those. 5 million is a lot of money, but 5 million compared to 40 million is not very much, but we need those smaller pots to be able to press forward to get to that point of confidence in the project to obtain the big money. So we're following every path that we can that makes sense. 5 million, a contribution from the Port of Hood River, and next steps was repetitive, but we're asking for the 5 from both states. Looking hard at infra and build. We already got a build grant, but there's that Build Back Better legislation that we're already dialing into or anticipating a big ask there, along with the federal loan and bond programs, but especially TIFIA. And then of course there's P3. So there's a lot more of that iteration of funding possibilities that's going to happen in the next couple of years. Here's one that's really more directed at the Port of Hood River, but it becomes something central to all of our either expectations or understanding. But this commission believes that what we're doing is leading up to a transition of the project to someone else. That someone else, under one scenario, could be a P3 entity. And if we're prepared for it, and if the agreement can be negotiated that's acceptable to everyone, that's one construct for the future. The other, and the one that we're most specifically pursuing, is the Bi-State Bridge Authority or Bi-State Bridge Compact, which is essentially creating a new government. And the government that's created would be representative of multiple governments and of the individuals on the Bi-State Working Group now. That form of a new government needs to be authorized. We need authorization from most states, obviously. And then we need to anticipate how that gets propped up. Who's the general counsel? What's the governance manual? Is there office space? Who's the general manager, executive director? All of those questions will need to be answered, asked and answered, and more in order to set up a new a new government that has sole or primary responsibility for bridge delivery. But again, this is more for the port. We're transitioning. Our role is to transition to someone else. And the ninth is also perhaps, and I hope self-evident, is that we've got multiple efforts going on at every level, and we're not, there's multiple project strategies, but it's really multiple project efforts at the same time. And that's something I think we all need to believe in, and you all need to tell us as staff or help us determine if we are or not, if there's something else that we should be pursuing at the same time. And so again, all this is rolled up, and this is just a diagram, but it is an important one because it's sort of a crude and diagrammatic way of representing what these different phases of project delivery are. And so we're reaching the end of phase one. There's an overlap now with phase two because we're now working on the build grant, trying to get that agreement, actually just get the agreement from the federal government, and then that will lead to, once approved, then we'll be selecting an engineer and these other steps. And so phase two becomes really important because phase two is when you characterize the project sufficiently to be prepared for that big ask that I've said earlier. So phase two is not only that phase where you're demonstrating credibility and for a larger amount of funding or for a financial structure that can make sense, but you're also at the tail end of phase two transitioning to another agency, another form of government, bi-state bridge compact. So that by the time you get towards the end of phase two and certainly into phase three, based on the other strategic principle, there's another entity that's making decisions. There's another entity saying, yeah, we want to continue that same bridge engineer, or we want to go through a P3 approach or whatever the case may be. And so if these years are rough-cutly accurate, you could say that somewhere around 2023 is when that transition would take place. And I could go into a lot more detail about what that might be, but generally speaking, phase three is when there's a transition. At the bottom, you see the legislative sessions, and those are important because at a state level, we've always believed that each state will need to contribute a significant amount of money, each together, probably in the same amount. And the only way you're going to get that kind of money is if you're in a long session, not a short session. And so every other year, the odd years, 23 becomes really important, and then 25 becomes really important. If you make that assumption, long sessions are when there's a transportation bill. Long sessions are when you have a chance of getting some bigger money. But then also go back to the first part of this presentation and consider what I said about the point at which you have to start putting a lot more money into the current bridge. And that coincides with somewhere around 26, 27, and tell me I'm wrong, Kevin, but that coincides about with when the EIS, once it's approved, times out, or at least it has to go back to a supplemental to keep it going. So things start to come together around that. There's no precise date, but certainly 26, 27, that's when the decision points become much more profound about the existing bridge. And then here, second to last is, this is as modified by staff. After we presented to the commission, I met with President Everett and each commissioner. We talked a bit about the bridge, the strategy. And one is, it felt like it was too many, there were too many points to it. And two, it seemed like a couple of them were not so much strategic objectives or even principles, but rather statements. And so what we have developed in very draft form is a 7-point replacement strategy that you see there. And then this last slide before we want to just see what everyone has to say. These are some of the questions that came up in this the last several months from an individual or sometimes individuals that were posing questions about the effort that's underway. And I can answer these or try to answer if you want, but this is one of the first one was, why don't you say, just set a closure date? Why don't you say, hey, the bridge is, we can keep it open to 2025 and after that it's closed. Or why don't you say at 2027, then we're going to say no trucks on the bridge. That goes back to that very first slide or second slide that says the commission has always felt its first and foremost obligation is to keep it open and operational as long as possible. We're already seeing some impacts from the weight reduction that occurred from several businesses. Two, why don't you stand up a large project organization? Why don't you hire the people now that can deliver the project throughout, that have the requisite experience, financial, construction, and such, that can do that. And of course, one answer is there is no money to do that now, and two, we're not ready for that now. It's not the time to invest in that sort of a large structure. Take steps to determine project delivery method now. Goes back to the strategy. That's what we're doing, is keeping all our options open, trying not to spend money that won't be needed or useful, no matter what project delivery method. And most importantly, perhaps, we don't have a project owner. We don't have an organization or agency that's ready to take on and make those decisions. And then you see a couple more. The last one, determine who will own the bridge. That's sort of self-evident. We don't know that because we don't know if we're going to have a bi-state bridge authority or compact, or if there's some other structure that or a delivery model that would be pursued. Okay. That's the longest phase of this presentation, and I just want to lay out more or less what went to the commission, and then see or just hear from the group. Does this sound like it's the right way to characterize, summarize the strategic path we're following, or are we missing something or things? Yeah, Kate.
So it kind of looked like from what you presented to the Port Commission and then the list you had there, that there has been an official decision that the port is okay with, wants to, I don't know how I would want to put it or state it, that the port would prefer not to have the bridge after the new bridge is built. Is that, am I assuming that correctly by what I saw?
I'll defer
to
the commissioners, but that's the consensus, I would say, of this commission is correct. That's right. We'll transition to another entity or agency.
So I have a follow-up question. If the bi-state bridge compact or authority had never come to fruition, and the bridge needed to be replaced still, which, you know, the port has always talked about, well, we need a new bridge eventually, would the port have taken that on?
Well, I don't think the port would take that on unless there was clear support from both sides of the river that whatever delivery structure was identified was absolutely acceptable to agencies on both sides of the river. So I can't conceive of the port saying, yeah, we're going to replace it, and without having that full-bodied, full-throated support from both sides. So there are ways in which the port could do it. It's a big lift, it's a big ask, because our agency size relative to 400 million is, and the expertise we have on staff and such is not conducive to delivery of a project, but there is a scenario that says, yes, with the right expertise, with the right involvement of, say, ODOT or WashDOT, with their deep bench of talent, that it could be done. But we would assume there would have to be very significant understanding, commitment in writing for how tolling is carried out and how toll rates are set and a myriad of other things.
Okay, thanks for that, Michael.
Arthur.
This is a follow-on on Mayor McBride's question. You talked about the transition from phase 2 to phase 3 of your plan around 2023. as being a critical date. My understanding, if you go by a P3 pathway, that at that point the bridge ownership would transition to the P3 partner, and that the port would no longer have financial control or financial involvement in the existing bridge. Do you have a financial model for the port that acknowledges that transition in such a short time frame?
No. Let me answer, multi-part answer. One is, if it's a P3, there is no scenario that says the ownership of the bridge will transition to another entity, private or public. Or so I should say it was private. And that's because the statutory authority you obtained in 2017 specifically said you can't sell the bridge, right? So if it's a P3 type delivery model, it would not be a transfer of ownership, it would be a long-term lease structure of some sort. Two, the question about the role of the port, the future of the port is very much on the minds of the commission and staff, and we're in the midst of a strategic business plan update. And that's sort of central to that update. It's okay, let's assume that the bridge is gone, meaning the transition can take place, but the current bridge would have to be maintained and open for several years after that until completion of the new bridge. So the transition point for the port, from the standpoint of our financial structure and what services we're able to deliver, would be out there when at the point at which the new bridge is open. But yes, absolutely, that's part of our thinking, that's part of our planning, and we as a port would have to and are implementing certain steps that would put us in the best possible financial position at that transition date, realizing that we either may not exist as a port anymore, and the services we provide, the parks and the airport and other things, would have to be absorbed by other entities, or we would be a vastly smaller organization with few employees and limited capabilities.
So maybe a semantic question as to transfer of ownership. I understand that lawyers care about that stuff, but for me, the real question is, when is there the transfer of tolling authority? So when do you perceive? What are you planning for? When are you planning for in terms of transition of tolling authority?
I can't say when, because that's all dependent upon all of our efforts, but I can say it would occur at the point at which the new bridge is open and operational.
Okay, so let me ask on a different sort of question. You talked about achieving a record of decision, and it's my understanding that the Federal Highways Administration requires a financial plan to be part of an EIS. It's an optional part of an EIS, but that for an Federal Highways Administration record of decision, you're required to have a financial plan. I don't recall seeing the financial plan in the EIS draft that we received, and I might not have looked that carefully, but is that prepared, or what is the plan to prepare that?
Michael, I could jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
So my understanding is that the requirement for the financial technical plan as a part of the EIS document is for projects 500 million and larger. So if you come in under that, that is not a specific requirement of the NEPA process, but the port certainly is working with Steve Siegel to develop a financial plan because it's really a requirement just for our own understanding of the process and what the future of the project would look like.
Doesn't it improve the completeness of the document and make it clear that the analysis has been done?
Yeah, I mean, Federal Highways has indicated that that specific chapter, if you will, is not required for projects under 500 million. But we're still undertaking that just so that as we're communicating the future of the project, because those questions obviously are going to come up, and that's where Steve Siegel is working with us to develop a financial plan So not only for future funding, but also for the bond application if when we're ready to go after TIFIA or other financing.
How confident are you that you're under 500 million?
Well, at this point, we did a fully loaded preliminary cost estimate that included all of the programming costs, and that final range in 2028 dollars was 330 million to just under 400 million, with I think the high end had a 40% contingency, but that also included all of the governance work, all of the financial development, traffic and revenue studies, everything that isn't engineering or construction.
Thanks.
A couple other questions on the not the replacement, but the things that have to be done to keep the current bridge going. And I was glad to see, you know, you kind of have you're going to get maybe 8 years. We're going to get about 8 years out, and then there's going to have to be a lot of money spent. It looks like from scouring through that spreadsheet. I looked through that spreadsheet earlier. And so there isn't, I couldn't quite make sense of the numbers at the bottom of the columns, the individual things you had written down, but then there was a total and I wasn't sure what had actually been totaled up at the bottom of those columns. But at least the numbers that were there look like it's not going to be a huge lift, hopefully, to keep it going for 5 years, maybe 7 years. So that was great. That was good news. But then during your presentation today, there was a lot of things that seemed like if we went the P3 direction sooner than later, or at least continue pushing to get more information about that, like we talked about a meeting or two ago, that some of those things that are on that list, we may not have to do, or they may be things that can be done and that may take years, 3, 5, 7 years to get done. And maybe they'll happen and maybe they won't, meaning funding in certain buckets. But if we went forward with the P3 and we're like, okay, we're going to get it done, we're going to have it finished in 5 years, we're going to go the P3 route, it doesn't mean we can't do all those other things. And if we get that money, great, we can throw that money into the bucket. The tolls are going to be less, and that's fantastic. But it would set us on a path. And it wouldn't feel like, well, if we don't get the money, I guess we're not going to get the bridge for 20 years, or we don't get the money, we're not going to get the bridge for 15 years. I feel more confident that a bridge was coming sooner than later, but it doesn't mean we wouldn't, you know, we could continue to get this extra buckets of money from the states and the feds in the meantime. So that's my take on all those things that you've got that we need to do. And I agree, let's do them, but let's just try and, I guess I'm channeling Bob's frustration with speed here right now.
Well, I just say that the P3 option is on the table, is absolutely one of the options. And I think the main point is that we need to press forward on that front, but other fronts, because there's no certainty and we want to keep our options open.
And I'd like to add a point to the conversation that when, what's the construction saying is you can have it cheap, fast, or good and choose any two of the above. And to my mind, cost of crossing is relevant to the discussion. Indeed, I think drives the success of what we're trying to do, because the cost of crossing the river is a friction on our regional economy. And the lower we can get that cost, the less friction we're going to have, and the more vibrant we're going to be as a bi-state, regional, national scenic area reality. So to bring in somebody today that will say, yeah, I'll loan you every dollar you need at 8%, will create a certain toll, versus doing the work to try and find our own money at 4% or granted at 0%. So when we say speed, we have to put at what cost at the end of that question. Because if it's $10 to cross the river, it's too much friction for our economy. That's just another point to add in your.
Right. I get it, John. I think that these buckets of money that we're trying to get, we can just add those in and, you know, reduce the toll if we get them.
I agree fully. I agree fully. And certainly getting a P3, I thought plenary presentation during that P3 conference was really reasonable. I thought that Colorado's approach to US 36 with a long-term lease arrangement so that the highway remained in, you know, control, financial control of the P3 until the funding was paid and then reverted to the state of Colorado. That was a model that I thought was really attractive. Still need to plug the numbers and find out what toll it creates. But part of their responsibility was to go out and gather funds from TIFIA and the feds, and they're probably not so effective at the state level, but we're working the state level.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree, John.
Yeah, me too.
So John, it seems like you just made the argument for the financial model. Because
oh yeah,
we're
absolutely.
in a situation where we might discover very quickly, we might discover that doing it quickly will result in some toll, which we don't know what that toll number is. And certainly if we get the funds granted to us, that's a wonderful solution where magically maybe we don't have any tolls at all. But if we, because of that decision, wind up not building a bridge for 10 years, 15 years, there's significant costs associated with that. So that's what a financial model would look at.
Absolutely, because we can't go 10 or 15 years. You know, there's a hard stop that is dictated by the maintenance schedule. And that's about 6 years out. If we don't get this done by 2025, it becomes problematic, for me at least, to see how we come to a successful conclusion.
It's just more and more expensive, clearly. You know, we haven't seen a hard stop in that. I didn't see any chart that showed a hard stop, but I certainly saw reason to believe that the uncertainties become so high on numbers that are already very high that it wouldn't be responsible for us to plan that way.
Agreed. Or cost is so expensive that it doesn't serve our economy. It damages our economy.
We haven't heard from the Klickitat County contingent.
Betty has her hand up, Kevin.
Oh, does she? Okay, yeah, Betty, please.
I just wanted to put my hand up for Jacob. He keeps trying to speak and never gets there. That's it.
Thanks, Betty. Kevin, I guess I've got quite a few questions. Number one, if we go the P3 route, what is our potential liability? Because now the state's going to look at us and say, well, you guys have private funders. We're not going to give you 100 million. We might only give you 50 because you guys have this planned out. I look at that both from the state and federal. If we're looking at a $4 trillion infrastructure package, that infrastructure package is going to be broke over probably 4 years or more. If we can get 100 million from that federal infrastructure package, which I think because of where the Washington senators and reps sit, we have a good chance of that if we push hard on there. We just heard from Curtis King talking about potentially 100 million from Washington State. He's sitting in the perfect spot. I don't know Oregon as well, but if this is the possibility, this is where I think that we need to be putting all of our eggs in that basket, right? Giving us the money to do the engineering. We're promising we're going to get the engineering done, but we need to know that in 3 years or 4 years down the line that we're a part of this package and that we're included in this. And if that's the discussion that we're having with these people, and Curtis, I thought, did a good job pointing out, he said, get us the information and we'll start running up the flagpole. But it sounds like we haven't made the hard decisions about whether it's going to be a compact or who's going to manage it. He needs that information right now. But if we're looking at 300 million, 380 million with a 40% contingency, that would be amazing if we could pull 300 off, 100 from each. And then what would be the purpose of a P3 do? To me, that wouldn't add any value. The thing is practically going to run itself. We're going all electric tolls. If it's kind of designed the way it is, your maintenance schedule and expenses for the next 20 years are going to be reduced. You're not going to have all that steel you're worried about all the time. I just don't understand why the P3 is the right, to me, the P3 is the backup when nobody else is at the state or feds are willing to do it. But just like John said, I keep running the numbers on the P3 model with their 10% ROI a year. We're looking at tolls that the economy here just can't support. So in that respect, do we push off the bridge painting for another 5 years rather than doing it in 2028, that $28 million or whatever it was, push that to 2033. And now if that gives us the time to come up with that, say 50 or $80 million more, to me, that's a win. And in terms of who takes over the bridge when it's all said and done, I mean, that's obvious. As part of the $300 million package, the decommissioning of the current bridge is included in it. That's just part of the construction package. And then the port's out of that business. Tell me where I'm going wrong on this. I know that we're sitting there, we're in a really beautiful position in terms of asking for lots of money. I don't want to say, look, we're going this P3 route and add into that Curtis King saying, well, I guess you don't need the 100 million. You're going to use private funds. I guess that's where I stand.
I've been sitting in bridge committee since 2007, and your predecessor and your predecessor's predecessor had pretty much the same. We felt the same in 2007 in terms of the ability to get funds. Back then, there was a plan. It was going to be 100 million from the two states, 100 million from tolls, and 100 million from the federal government, and we're never able to get that to materialize. So I think it would be fantastic if we, maybe we've lucked out with this, being here just at the very time when this building bigger, better. I forget what the acronym is, but I just heard it for the first time last night. But maybe we're just lucky and coming along at the right time. But I'm quite suspicious that with all the infrastructure needs in the country, this is very close to the bottom of the list in most big picture views. So I would be very, very cautious about any solution that depends heavily or requires us to get federal funding that simply may not materialize. We may find ourselves 10 years down the road in a worse borrowing environment, needing to borrow money and not being able to find it.
I agree. We faced draconian, Damocles sword kind of situation, but in a financial model is the way we can start to quantify that and say, we must accomplish this by this point in the process or abandon it and take a different route. But I agree fully with Jacob. Our least expensive and biggest win will be money that comes to us for free. And politics being what it is, it's about who's sitting in the seat more than where our place is in the priority. And we got good people in seats right now.
Another comment that I would add is what are the required changes to Washington statute? And between a bridge authority and any legislative changes that are required in Olympia, those are really important, challenges or opportunities, maybe both, to take into consideration. And I think that's one of the reasons why the bi-state working group is such an effective group, because once we come up with the right approach, then we're going to both Olympia and Salem with the same message, and there's an understanding of where we're trying to go. And I think it's going to take a little bit to get the bridge authority, assuming that that's where we're going, to get through the legislative process, plus whatever P3 rules need to be changed in Washington state legislation.
Is there a political risk to that? I certainly understand that you have to have those legislative changes, but who is on the other side when it comes to the question of making the statutory changes in Washington state to achieve this?
Well, I think it's critical that our partners in Klickitat County are the ones taking that flag to Olympia.
Sure.
And Arthur, in response to what you said, this has been going on. People have been saying we need to replace the bridge for 30 years. And people have been talking about it and trying. I would say that the difference now is that this time around on the EIS, we're almost through the end of that. And we're getting buy-in from both states right now for the next phase. If we're getting buy-in, that's a good sign that they're going to be there, because they don't want to spend the money to not have it built, because that's money wasted. And they're well aware of the time frame that you have on an EIS before you have to go and do another $5 million EIS or whatever it costs back then. So I mean, it's a good time to be in this position, and you guys have done such a great job. I would hate to push the P3 if we don't need it, that could have any negative impacts. And if I'm burning political will in Olympia, I want to be burning political will so that we can have the bi-state compact and agreement and authority like so many other states have done all over the place. And we have, we've got 30 years of working together on a bi-state agreement here in the Columbia River Gorge. So I think it's a lot of education up in Olympia. This wasn't the greatest year to be in Olympia or Salem due to COVID. We all know that. Next year might be a lot better year that sets us up for the big ask the year after. And we'll have a good set of engineering done and buy-in hopefully by then.
I think before we know for sure if going a P3 route is a negativity to getting funding, we should investigate that, because we don't really know that that's negative. It may be that they'll think, gosh, you guys are taking the initiative. You're going to, get this money. We're going to be the fill-in money, whether it's going to be 50 million or 100 million or however it is. It may be that the states and the feds will not look at that negatively. So I think before we just are sure that that's going to be a negative thing, we should just investigate it further.
I agree, Kate, that it's early in the process to say we're sure about anything.
Yeah.
I don't think we're not closing doors yet.
Okay.
In my view.
And one thing I
will say, the one thing I know is that if I can get somebody else to pay for something and I don't have to, I'll always do it. And that's a pretty obvious statement from anyone in Olympia.
Yep, agreed.
Arthur, one thing that you mentioned earlier is the finance plan. And I've been approached by members of the working group about starting that process. And that was one of the reasons why I invited Steve Siegel. Our approach is to, over the next couple of months, is to actually start developing that financial plan and bringing it out and working with the working group to start putting some ornaments on the bones of what a finance plan would look like. And there's a lot of intricate details, at least for most of us. And so I think Steve is the right individual to start that process. And if you recall, I don't want to get too far off into the next bi-state working group meeting, but there were a number of things that we were going to start tackling. And then this strategy session kind of set that back. But we're ready in 2 weeks or whenever the bi-state working group is ready to reconvene from on a business level to start tackling some of those elements. Let's see, there is a final section of this presentation on communication. Michael, is there anything else that we need to conclude as far as do we need to get more feedback on those 7 strategy points?
Well, I guess I would just turn that back and say this represents something we think is getting close, and that we would want to reflect back to the Port Commission. And again, this strategy, these objectives will change, but the fundamental principles that I laid out there, I'm asking if this bi-state group feels that those are pretty much on the right track.
Let me just put those back up here.
Can we get a copy of that? I mean, we're running out of time in the meeting here and
Yeah.
we went through that really fast. I think it would help if we had some time to think about it. Me,
Absolutely.
anyway.
I'll send that out.
I agree, Bob. I was just going to ask the same question.
Well, for the sake of time, I'll just very briefly go through the project communications. As far as the information that I am providing the working group, I try to send a monthly written report to the members of the working group via email. We try to have meetings on a monthly basis. There's obviously verbal reports and updates as new information comes forward. Try to bring in the key consultants and staff for more value. We have created a bi-state working group webpage, which is currently hosted on the port's website, which long-term is probably not the best location for that. It really does need to stand on its own. But for the meantime, that webpage includes all of the, we started creating minutes and materials are all archived on that working group webpage. We clearly have good representation with alternates, and it's great to see Christy and Arthur attend as alternates. And I think this last one is maybe in some ways even the most important is what's the best way for your entire council or commission or board to feel comfortable on the progress of the bridge replacement project. Because as we move forward, you know, we certainly don't want to come to your board or council at a point in the future and we find out that maybe there's 2 or 3 people that either had a misunderstanding on some component or there's some feedback that we need to incorporate. So I think that there's a lot of tools that we use to communicate to the public. But I do think that conversation about the working group responsibilities as far as communicating to your boards, but also taking advantage of me when needed to come and do a more in-depth dive with your board so that you feel like there's a really good comprehensive understanding of the project as we move forward. So
Kevin, I know our board really appreciated when you came and did the deep dive on what was going on. And I've given updates through, you know, my report. You know, they're short, but I think that your more in-depth report is definitely welcome. And, you know, at least a couple times a year for the city council, for our city council would be great.
Great, excellent. I'll reach out to each of you individually just to find out the best, you know, the best number that I can attend your meetings. I know you're very busy, so I'll reach out for specifics as to when I can start coming into your meetings. All right, let's see. I think that we're done. So hopefully that was time well spent for the working group. Are there any closing thoughts and before we close out this afternoon?
Do we have another time yet for meeting?
I'm going to send out a notice the next couple of days, but I'm hoping that we can get to that in the next, you know, 2 weeks.
Okay.
I think we're in good shape to actually start checking some boxes on some of the information that we've discussed.
And what will the subject matter of that meeting be?
Well, I think that
general idea.
Yeah. So one of the things, so we've got 60% RFP for the AE design contract, and so I think it's important that the working group have a good feeling for what's in that document. It's designed to go to full 100% with off ramps at 15%, 30%, et cetera. So I think it's important that everybody understands what's in that so that we can get that issued and start getting some engineering completed. There's also the introductory session with Siegel in starting to look at the financial plan. What are the criteria that need to be understood or considered moving forward? So we need to start that process. And so I think these are all, short presentations. We'd like to bring Jen Meyer back from the Seattle area on the P3 just to get an update from her and give her an update on where we're at and get some feedback from her. So I anticipate that it would be elements that have already been discussed, but maybe not necessarily a real deep dive, but enough to where there's some good Q&A and we can give you some confidence that we're going on the right track so that we can get these contracts on the street and start getting some of these technical folks on board.
And is Steve under contract right now to do the financial analysis, or is that something that will be discussed at the next meeting?
Steve's currently under contract for the financial work and the governance work.
Great.
All right, well, I will send out some a doodle poll or a handful of dates and times. And I think this is a good discussion. It's good to see that we've got good bi-state support, and also in the NC2A tournament, we've got all of our college teams in both Oregon and Washington are doing really well. So I think this is a good start to March Madness. So if you have any questions, reach out to me, and otherwise I'll be in touch shortly. Thank you, everybody.